don't question how they feel. I think would be very important. I also think it's important to ensure that they are not hurting themselves or others when it comes to whatever they're experiencing. That's when you would need to seek immediate action for that if they are harming themselves or someone else. But ultimately, a lot of these people are just coming to you for a sense of like you're their life raft in the middle of the ocean. They are looking for just a little bit of support through what they're experiencing. And ultimately, just be there to listen, be open-minded, don't come from a place of judgment, and ask them questions about what you can do to best support them. A lot of people, when they are struggling with their mental health, they might not understand what they might need in that moment, but feel free to ask them. Do you need me to just sit here with you and, listen and nod and like let you know that things are going to be okay? Do you need a safe space for the night? Do you need me to talk to a family member with you about this? Do you need me to come with you to a doctor's appointment? Also within your own boundaries and with what is within your limits. But asking them questions about what they need to feel supported in that moment and moving forward is going to be probably the best thing I would suggest. It's difficult, especially when it comes to someone reaching out for support, but ultimately this is not an easy choice for them because they are struggling deeply. So just be there to nod, listen, acknowledge, validate what they're saying.
Yeah, it can feel like a lot of pressure if somebody's coming to you, and if they are like, I've had experiences and I know other people have had experiences where they're like told things that are just too much. Like, for instance, I'm going to X myself, or something like that. That is heavy stuff, and that is not something that you have to take on. So it's within your discretion and your boundaries, like you said. So you kind of touched on what I was going to say too, is just knowing what you can take on and being there to help with those, like facilitating connections between the right people, because you're not expected to be a therapist or a doctor of any sort. But if they're reaching out to you, just know like you did something right. They trust you, and just listening, validating, asking like what you can do is plenty. So yeah, I think that's really important. And this is such a big conversation. And I mean, we could go on and on about it in a million different ways, but I'd love to kind of switch gears and talk about your other diagnosis and being a woman and having these diagnoses and how it's changed your life, because I know you kind of touched on how body neutrality has helped you immensely and therapy has helped you immensely. And I think getting diagnosed with things just helps so much with validating and giving you more of a roadmap of how to navigate things. So what is the story there?
So great question. I mean, it's funny because my diagnosis with ADHD came the same time I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. Not by the same people, but it was like, it just happened to be like a month apart. And ultimately, my ADHD diagnosis helped me so much in my life, because when you just like constantly think there's something wrong with you, it's really hard to understand, just accept that. I mean, for years, I thought there was something wrong with me. I could tell you, I can think back to like a time when I was in elementary school, and I remember reading some tips and tricks on how to stay focused in class and like really take in as much information as you can. And it was like looking at the person who's speaking to you in their eyes and like kind of replaying back in your head what they had just said to you. And I remember trying that in class, and I remember thinking, I literally have no idea what any of like the past 15 minutes was. I
Yeah.
can tell you, like, I was hyper fixated on being hyper focused, and that was just not doing anything for me. So when I got my ADHD diagnosis, I was 24, and it was like probably one of the best things that could have happened to me. It was just like there isn't anything wrong with me. It's just because I'm ADHD that my brain works differently. And so that kind of led me into a deep dive of like, how does my brain work? And like, it also led me to like the ADHD side of TikTok, where people talked about their experiences, and I'm like, oh, I've experienced that. I'm like, that's how my brain works. And it's just like, once I started to find more people that were like me, and like their brain worked like me, it just made me feel so much more normal. And it's like, it's okay that my brain works a different way. I just have to do things a little bit differently, and that's okay. But I can still be just as productive, just as amazing of an employee, if I just needed to learn what was going on with my brain. And I had worked different places where I just was like, I don't know what I'm not picking up on. And I don't know what in my brain is not clicking. And I sometimes, and I think back to like, I could have done so much better in school if I had known that I was like ADHD and this was how my brain worked. Ultimately, I am where I am because of, my experiences in life, and that's okay. I know I have the information that I have now, and I'm responsible for the path that I lead with that. So I just ultimately, at the end of the day, it was completely life-changing when it came to my diagnosis. A lot of people have said, well, it's just a diagnosis. Like I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, that literally validates everything with the way that I understand how my brain works. I'm not dumb. I mean, sometimes it's easy to get into those like self-destructive patterns, especially when you're like, I just don't understand what is going on. I'm just really thankful for all of the resources and tools that people have put out there when it comes to ADHD and mental health, because I wouldn't be where I am now, and I wouldn't know as much as I do about my own brain now and how that works. So that's ultimately one of the reasons why I talk out about mental health and everything that I've experienced, because it's like, oh, if I can make one person feel a little less, break them somewhat out of a destructive mindset, then I'm okay with that. If I validate someone's feelings because, our brains work a certain, the same way, amazing. So ultimately, that's why I'm so open about it. But yeah, it was one of the best things ever, was being diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah. And some people take on that label and some people won't, but I feel that too. Like when I've been diagnosed with things, I'm like, okay, there's a name for it. And when you were talking, I was kind of thinking like it's before somebody gets glasses, kind of, because they look around and they're like, okay, maybe I should be seeing, like, this isn't necessarily what happens, but it's like a kind of analogy, I guess. Like
Yeah.
looking around and other people aren't wearing glasses and or needing any help, and you're like, okay, well, this is probably normal. I just, I can't see. That sucks. Like other people are probably doing better than me. And then you finally get your glasses and you're like, okay, I just needed this little like help, or there wasn't something wrong with me this whole time, is huge. It's huge. And I think that's just another reason to see a therapist or seek help, because when you do have that confirmation, it helps your mental health in itself, like having that diagnosis and then medication if you choose to. What are some things that you do? I mean, so with your medication, I assume you're on medication. Maybe I shouldn't assume that. Okay.
Yes.
So do you find that it helps you? And then if it doesn't take away all your symptoms, what do you do to kind of manage anything that's still sticking around, if that's applicable to you?
Yeah. So one of the things I will mention when it comes to my ADHD is that ADHD and binge eating are very much correlated. So when I was diagnosed with a binge eating disorder, it was also mutually validating for the two. So it was just like, okay, I'm like, my eating, like the way that I eat can also depend on how my brain works. And, they are very different in the sense of like recovery wise. I mean, obviously having ADHD, my brain is never really going to recover. It's just how my brain is. But I do take some medication for my ADHD. I used to, when it came to like work, I would be so exhausted. So I was diagnosed with ADHD, but I feel like I'm more like ADD because I'm not necessarily hyper, like the hyper side of ADHD. I found that I was actually like chronically exhausted. I would have a good night's sleep, but I was constantly in a state of zombie mode. And when I started to take my medication in the morning, and it took me a long time to like actually get to a place where like, I was like, okay, now my medication I feel like is working. Because I was taking it the wrong way for so long. They do say to take it in the morning, but I would like take it like whenever I just remembered. But I started to realize that when I took it in the morning, I wasn't, it was almost like waking my system up. It was just like a really like great coffee, essentially. But essentially like, I used to get to the point where before I would take my medication or like take my medication like properly, I just like was so exhausted. I was so tired. I would be working and I'm like, I cannot do this. I cannot physically go on with my day, which would make me anxious. It would make me feel sick. I would want to throw up. And I'm like, I need to call it. Like, I need to call it. And I would miss so much work because of it. And then I started to take my medication the way I believe it was intended. I mean, I was just told to take it in the morning, but it didn't say that on the medication. And so I would just take it whenever I felt like it. But then I started to take it in the morning before I started work, like half hour before I started work. And the night and day difference, I still feel tired, but not to the excruciating point that I was before. So I was like, I think I was on my medication for a year and a half before I started to properly take it. And like I did, like, don't get me wrong, like when it came to first starting my medication, I was like, I feel like completely different, like in a good way. I feel like I can actually complete